Robert E. Lee served 17 years as an officer in the Corps of Engineers, supervising and inspecting the construction of the nation's coastal defenses. After leading his troops for many long and hard years, he eventually had to surrender.
In March 1864, President Lincoln elevated General Ulysses S. Grant to the rank of Lieutenant General and named him General-in-Chief of the Armies of the United States. Making his headquarters with the Army of Appomattox, Grant was determined to crush Robert E. Lee and his vaunted Army of Northern Virginia at any cost.
General Brian Grimes led a battle against Lee that was a success. This was the beginning stages of the fall of Lee's troops.
General John B. Gordon's corps attacked the Union. This hurt Lee's soldiers even more and brought them closer to the time of surrender.
On April 8th, Lee started to move his troops west towards Appomattox. Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865.
General Lee's armies ran out west by a larger, more powerful army. It is growing smaller and smaller from years of war.
Lee realizes his food sources are being cut off and comes to terms with settling a compromise. Then Lee says, "There is no other choice than to meet with Grant. I would rather die 1,000 deaths."
Both Lee and Grant meet at the Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. After fighting for many years, they had a sense of understanding to come to terms to agree with surrendering.
Reconstruction had begun in that moment. When Union forces cut off his final retreat, Lee was forced to surrender, finally ending 4 years of bloody sectional conflict. This typed surrender document was written on April 9, 1865 by General Robert Lee. He wrote the letter to General Grant and his army to surrender war between the U.S. and Confederate armies. In the document, Lee described a compromise saying that the U.S. Army could not harm the Confederate Army unless they disobeyed their parole. General Lee and General Grant met in the Appomattox Courthouse to officially end their war.
General Robert E. Lee wrote a farewell address to his troops, explaining how he was thankful for the troops' service and all they have done for the battle. Lee tells the ones who have survived that they may return home, and Lee explains how he is determined to avoid the useless sacrifice of those who served in the past. Lee wrote this farewell in a very formal manner.
The Appomattox War started in March 29, 1865 in Virginia. It began when the Federal Army of the Appomattox crossed the James River. Lee tried to invade the North by going through Pennsylvania in order to capture the Union Army at Harrisburg. The invasion was interrupted by the Battle of Gettysburg. Lee's army was defeated and they surrendered.
General Grant received a letter from General Lee expressing his feelings about how he wants to surrender and end the war. The note Grant sent back explained how he agrees to avoid more bloody battles, which results in many more deaths. This was handwritten and informally sent.
Colonel Charles Marshall commented afterward, "There was no theatrical display about it. It was in itself perhaps the greatest tragedy that ever occurred in the history of the world, but it was the simplest, plainest, and most thoroughly devoid of any attempt at effect that you can imagine."